cousin falsely accused me of sexual assault. Family cut me off. Now she's dying, admitted the truth, but they still want me to stay silent. Let's call her Jade. My cousin wrongfully accused me of sexual assault when I was 18. Sadly, my family thought her narrative was true. 4 years older than me, Jade and I were close growing up, but finally, she cheated on him, and their marriage broke up a few years later. She tried to keep in touch with Jade for a few years, but finally moved away with her new partner, and they never got back in touch. A respectable man, my uncle always battled obstacles on his own and refused assistance. After his divorce, he never sought another major relationship. He devoted his life to parenting Jade. He even built a college fund for Jade, but after she turned 18, he told her that although he had done all in his ability to help her, she was now on her own financially. She would come over to rant to my mom following every disagreement with her father. Although I personally felt my uncle was reasonable, I kept my thoughts to myself as Jade would visit to speak with my mother and not me, as she usually did. Jade came up to our house one day without warning. I was the only one in the house. Though I had rather different ideas on the topic, I could see she expected me to be as empathetic as my mother. I cut her off when she once more started grumbling about her father. I told her now it was her chance to show him right. If she truly wanted to pursue a master's degree or perhaps a doctorate, she would have to do what everyone else does and pay for it herself. I advised her maybe she should give up on further study if she already decided it was difficult for her to work while she was still in school. I said she quite obviously hadn't anticipated that reality check. She started screaming at me and calling me a vile human being as soon as I said all of this. She said I was a pampered brat who didn't deserve the support I received. Hence, I would never be able to relate to what she was experiencing. Though I stayed quiet, to be honest. I felt she was more of a pampered brat than I was. She screamed at me for a few minutes, then fled the house sobbing. I avoided her since, as I mentioned, I had no interest in hearing her grievances over and over again. The sequence of events surprised me as well. My whole life collapsed the next day when she accused me of SA. Jade was acting as though she were not even in a state fit for communication. Most of the speaking came from my uncle. He said that following her confrontation with him, Jade had been inconsolable when she had returned home the day before. She eventually informed him I had lured her in and carried out the conduct she was now accusing me of when my parents were not home. Not even my uncle could look at me, and my parents avoided eye contact as well. None listened when I tried to object and assert my innocence. It was appalling. People already treated me like a criminal even though I had done nothing. Whether I cried out or not, my uncle and dad totally turned away from me. It was so annoying that I grabbed a vase and tossed it against the wall in an attempt to get their attention. That backfired. Regrettably, my dad lost his cool, grabbed my arm, and hauled me to my room, closing me within there. There was no way I could let Jade get away with this. Hence I kept hammering against the door until my hands and arms started hurting. Telling such a big lie may have destroyed my reputation. Sadly, my dad decided to send me to live with my great-uncle somewhere far from the family. With his bad attitude and anger problems, this great-uncle was the least liked family member. They were going to take my college fund and give it to her. I tried to complain, but there was no communication with them. Finally, I gave up, as I no longer saw the need. Not even my own folks trusted me. Since her own father would never accept financial help from anyone, including his own family, I understood that Jade had most likely accused me unjustly only to control my parents and extract money out of them. After that episode, a few days later, I was ready to go and packed. Neither my parents bothered to say goodbye or give me a hug. They kept me under house arrest by posing as I wasn't even at home for the following few days. My phone was taken away, and I was not let said farewell to any of my friends. They cautioned me that they would destroy my life personally should I fail to get off the grid and vanish from everyone's lives. as he had a bad attitude and rage problems, as I've noted. Though I knew my parents were paying him money every month, he still acted as though he was doing me a great favor by allowing me to stay with him. After the first few weeks, I understood there was no use to weep over spilled milk, as all I could do was maximize the circumstances. Not even could I go to college. I had been admitted to the college of my choice, but I lacked the resources to pay for attendance. I could leave the house owned by my great-uncle. I had the good fortune to have a few colleagues around my age who were likewise having financial difficulties. The three of us decided to chip in and share an apartment, and grew close friends. I knew my great-uncle would consider it a good riddance, so I didn't even bother telling him when I moved out of his house. Never heard from any of my family members once I moved out. I have been living with the same folks I found my first apartment with for the past 3 years. Every one of us has been quite fortunate. After a few months of working in the warehouse, we have switched jobs and worked to save some money. I'm making a good salary currently working in sales. I have been considering applying once more to universities. My 2 buddies are doing great as well. Well, we recently moved into a larger apartment in a far better area. Naturally, my family believes it's the ideal time to attempt and come back into my life now that things are beginning to show promise for me. I was pretty taken aback when my dad contacted me by email a few days ago, since, as I indicated, I hadn't spoken with them in 3 years. So I stayed to the guidelines. Though they never tried to get in touch with me, my email address has not changed in 3 years, and I never banned them anywhere. Reading the email, my dad required my address and contact details in case I wished to get in touch on my own time. He also included his personal contact details. And I suppose had at last acquired a conscience or something. She informed her father the truth for whatever reason, and he talked with my parents. My parents chose to get back in touch with me once they knew the truth regarding Jade. Her pancreatic cancer diagnosis makes it quite improbable she will survive. She has been suffering for the past 8 months, and her health is just getting worse, even with continuous medication. Ironically, she couldn't even make decent use of the money from my education fund. She squandered all the money on bad life decisions. After screwing me off, she chose to take a gap year with all that money and tour the globe to expand her horizons and find herself, instead of working toward her master's degree, wanting to live luxuriously. She had already spent more than half of her savings. When she returned roughly 1.5 years earlier, she came back with very little left and began pestering my parents for more. She thus gave up on the concept of schooling since she lacked enough money left to afford a master's degree without working, and since working was something she refused to do. She still had some money left, but she kept her careless way of life. Instead of using it sensibly or trying to increase capital, she was already somewhat spoiled and lethargic from her year-long holiday. Despite not even seeking a job, she ultimately wasted more money purchasing an apartment and living above her means. Although I don't want to come across as callous after learning what had happened to her, I couldn't help but feel some gratification. She was her own worst enemy, so she had no enemies. After I closed the email from my dad, I had to consider whether or not I wanted to contact my parents again. I decided to talk to my friends about it. The email later, I at last opened it to my buddies. I told them everything about Jade, how she had lied and thrown me under the bus, and how my parents had thought her over me. I have to talk if I want to take back my life. I told my parents I intended to reveal the actual account of events before I went public. People have a right to know the truth. So it makes no difference whether Jade is lying on her deathbed. She destroyed my life. Today it is my chance to recover it. They seem to believe I can come back into their life and resume what I left behind. In a sense, they are correct. No one will probably challenge it. Though I could, I do not think I want to. So I don't even intend to return to the city yet. I do miss some of my relatives and friends who treated me well. They should at least be entitled to know the truth. What then would happen if I went ahead and revealed to my cousin, even if she is on her deathbed, the truth of why I had to leave everything behind for 3 years? Update 1: I finished it, lads. It would be quite legitimate for me to exact retribution. Many of the responses on this reflected the same viewpoint. Ultimately, it was my choice at the finish. Knowing most people would support me helped me feel much better. My first post was a week ago, and last night I finally posted a narrative of everything that has transpired in my life. Saying I wanted to be left alone since I had gone through something horrific and needed time and space to recover. People thus stopped trying to get in touch after the first few months. Even many of my family claimed to have waited patiently for me to come back. Seeing how ready everyone was to welcome me back and how none had forgotten me made me somewhat cry. Most importantly, I posted it some few days ago, and yesterday my folks got in touch with me, having only asked one thing, that I let sleeping dogs lie, they informed me. They were quite let down in me. They wanted me to come up with a reason for my 3-year absence, but not tell everyone the truth about what happened, since they think Jade deserves peace and quiet in her present state. After my post, apparently, Jade has lost almost all of her friends, and even family members are no longer eager to talk to her. They seem to be blaming me. They showed no pity or forgiveness for me. I at least am speaking the truth. Jade lies, and she got away for 3 years. I'm going to take back my life now. And today I am not under pressure to deal with my parents. For all I care, they and their expectations can go for a hike. Update 3: Hey, after 3 hard years, were my housemates. To be honest, they have gotten so close that we are now like brothers, and I wanted them to see my buddies too. Everyone has been getting along fantastic. My buddies were happy to see me, since they all were outraged when I mentioned I was planning to stay in a hotel. I am actually living with one of them right now, though I'm returning in a few days. People will always stand for what is right, which makes me rather glad. Having individuals around who love me more than my parents ever did makes me happy, as they did not forget me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Cast out by my family for favoring my golden child sister, my aunt helped me. Now they seek my help. Am I the for refusing? My life was completely upended 10 years ago when my family, particularly my sister Claire, chose to exclude me from the house. Why? I was viewed as a traitor by them since I managed to pay for my college education without their assistance. You understand what I mean when I say, "Oh cool, what's for dinner?" when I receive an A. My parents treated Claire like a prodigy. By the time she left for a prestigious business school, upon being admitted to a prominent UK college to study history, I had the hope that I may receive some assistance. However, no. I only asked them to help me escape a lifetime of debt, not to cover everything. However, they declined. Their logic: they were also hoping to launch a small business at the time. My parents had no difficulty spending a lot of money on Claire. I had no choice but to ask my Aunt Denise. My dad's older sister, Denise, is the total antithesis of my parents. In addition to being a brilliant neurosurgeon, she is also quite grounded. There was always this strange tension between her and my parents. They would pretend to be kind at family get-togethers. But she did. And because she was Claire, she had to make it into a tremendous dramatic ordeal rather than simply letting it go. I became aware that Claire had completely lost her mind at that point. She had created fictitious emails between Aunt Denise and me. I was taken aback. My parents refused to listen to me when I tried to explain that it was all a lie. No matter what I replied, they continued to say, "We trusted you, and you stabbed us in the back." They obviously believed Claire. She was always believed by them. It seemed as though I had vanished from the world. They instructed me to immediately collect my belongings and depart. I told a total lie, which led to my official expulsion from the house. I pleaded with them to think again. Aunt Denise had already promised to cover my tuition, so I didn't want to put her through any more trouble. My parents, however, were unconcerned. They claimed they didn't want to interact with me and labeled me a traitor. That was it. I only had a few boxes of my belongings and the clothing on my back when I fled. Aunt Denise took me in. To be honest, I'm not sure how I would have managed without her. She immediately took me in and showed me the kind of family I hadn't experienced in years. Denise was the only person who truly cared about me. Claire standing there with that arrogant expression on her face, knowing she had won, my parents staring at me like I was a criminal, and all of my belongings packed away. When I walked into my house, in a single night, how does one go from feeling like a member of a family to experiencing homelessness? Even though the entire situation seemed bizarre, I couldn't claim to be all that shocked. Although my parents had always made it apparent that Claire came first, I never imagined it would go this far. Being the angel that she is, Denise embraced me wholeheartedly. She didn't pry or ask a lot of questions. She simply told me that her house was mine for however long I needed it. After realizing how hurt I was, that type of generosity, man, it really got to me. Because I knew at that moment that I had never experienced anything like that from my own parents. I thus took up residence with Aunt Denise. Initially waking up in her guest room and seeing a house that wasn't mine. It felt weird, but as time went on, it began to feel more like home than the location where I was raised. As we talked about everything, we got closer. As it happens, I had no idea how much Aunt Denise knew about my parents' actions. For years, it had always been Denise's turn. She attended medical school, married a wonderful man who tragically died young, and created a wonderful life. My dad was doing all right in the meantime. Their relationship had basically devolved into a contest to see who could appear more attractive to the other members of the family. However, my dad hated his sister, rather than being proud of her. Denise suspected that my parents' treatment of me had been influenced by their jealousy. Denise knew all of this years ago, but she chose to remain silent so as not to aggravate me. She told me everything now that I lived with her. She seemed to be filling in all the blanks in my life that had never made sense. Like why my parents always went out of their way for Claire and why they never seemed to care what I did. It all came down to a strange family dynamic that I was completely unaware of. Although it was wonderful living with Denise, I was unable to fully unwind. I kept expecting my parents to call, for Claire to suddenly appear, or for them to say they were sorry. Naturally, though, that never took place. Weeks passed, and nothing happened. Not a single phone call, no text. I was initially incensed. How could they just ignore me as if I didn't exist? But eventually, Mom never forced me to discuss what had happened. She gave me time to think things through. She even made sure I had all I needed before I departed for the UK. As I gazed at the television, my blood began to boil. Simply put, she was making fun of me. I didn't answer. What was the purpose? There was nothing that made Claire feel bad. After blocking her number, I made an effort to move on. It wasn't simple. A part of me was still hoping for a message from my parents every time I checked my phone. There was radio silence. Denise and I developed a strong routine in the months that followed. She evolved into more than simply my aunt, she became my companion, confidant, and essentially my sole remaining relative. I began to see how dysfunctional my parents truly were. They had devoted so much of their time to making Claire into the ideal daughter that they had neglected everything else, and it would be too late for them to correct it when Claire made a mistake. Saying she knew I would succeed. Those words, spoken to me by a member of my family for the first time in my life, struck me more strongly than I had anticipated. I felt as though I was leaving behind more than just my house. When I boarded that plane, I was leaving behind the aspect of myself that had always aimed for my parents' favor. I made the decision that I no longer needed them. After that, I had myself, I had Denise, and I had my future. I wasn't going to waste any more energy chasing after people who obviously didn't care about me. But if they wanted to get in touch, that's okay. I was finished. The UK was a terrific place to live. I came back to my hometown after graduation, got a fantastic well-paying job, and then my mother called. Yes, my mother, the same woman who had stopped talking to me ever since I was expelled. My thoughts were racing as I gazed at the television. Do I have to respond to it? Disregard it? Why was she calling me now, after all that had transpired? I gave it a few more rings, then I took up. After hesitating once again, she abruptly stated, "We need to talk." I couldn't resist laughing. She wanted to talk now, after all? It was really normal for her. However, despite my annoyance, I had a natural curiosity. Why was she contacting me after all this time, and what could possibly be so important? "How about?" I asked in the most neutral tone I could. She stammered as though she was trying to find the perfect way to say it. Your father and I, we want to see you." I could clearly see the direction of this. Her delayed response just strengthened my suspicions. Her voice was quieter when she did talk, as if she was attempting to appear worried and maternal. "I've been going through a difficult period with your dad. The pandemic has made things difficult." The true cause for the call was there. It was precisely what I had anticipated. And it made sense that they were having trouble, given the pandemic. But after everything they had done to me, I wasn't going to step in and save them. "All right." I spoke in a flat tone. I had no intention of making things simple for her. She began. "Your sister Claire has been taking care of things for us." But I interrupted her at that point, knowing where this was going. I said, "Let me guess, Claire messed everything up." Her response was sufficient, but there was a lengthy gap on her end. Claire had messed it up, of course. I had no idea why they were taken aback. She always cared more about how she looked than about putting in the effort. It was backfiring. They had trusted her with everything. My mother drew a breathless gasp. She said, "Things haven't been going as planned, and we require assistance." I chuckled. I was unable to resist. They wanted my assistance after everything? After kicking me out, interrupting me. I said, raising my voice. All the feelings I had been suppressing for the last 2 years were rising to the surface, and I could feel the rage rising. Her voice faltered as she said, "I was ejected from the house by you. You trusted Claire's falsehoods about your own child. You need me now that we haven't spoken in years. And all of a sudden I'm expected to abandon everything and run after." Then she was silent. She was clearly unsure of what to say. She most likely wasn't used to me advocating for myself in this way. I would have just followed their instructions when I was still living at home in the hopes that it would maintain harmony. However, it is no longer the case. As if she was surprised that I was being so challenging. Sharply, she remarked, "We're still your family. That's at least how much you owe us." The last straw was that I responded, "I see. I owe you absolutely nothing. Go ask Claire for aid if you need it. Remember that she's your golden child." I hung up the phone without waiting for her answer. It was only a question of time until everything caught up with them. After a lengthy conversation, I was even more convinced that I had made the proper choice. I had done my part. It was their time to face the repercussions now. First update. After that phone conversation with my mother, I believed that the family drama was over. To be honest, I was pleased with the way things turned out. At last, I had defended myself and stated unequivocally that I would not serve as their safety net. I assumed they would simply give up and resume relying on Claire. However, I didn't account for my sister's capacity to stir things up. Claire wasn't going to let me get away with it. Of course. Something strange happened around 2 weeks after my mom and I spoke on the phone. A knock on the door interrupted my otherwise uneventful Saturday afternoon, while I was tidying up around my house. I don't get many visits anymore. I was a little perplexed because I live alone, and most of my friends know to text before they visit. When I peered through the peephole, guess who was there? Yes. So why was she now showing up at my door as if nothing had happened? Although my first instinct was to ignore her, I knew Claire well enough to know that she would stay until she achieved her goals. Before I could say anything, she grinned as if we were best friends. As I opened the door, "Hey!" she exclaimed, sounding vivacious and phony. "A long time has passed." I was totally unprepared and just stared at her for a moment. "Yes, it has, Claire. What are you doing here?" She had this incredibly charming look on her face as if she believed she could win me back with charm. She tilted her head slightly and continued, "I wanted to talk. May I enter?" I remained in the doorway with my arms crossed. "How about I asked, trying to sound as impartial as I could. For a moment, her smile wavered, but she immediately got it back. My curiosity overcame me. I didn't bother making her feel welcome, but I moved aside to let her in. I didn't ask if she wanted something to drink, and I didn't offer her a seat. After everything she had done, she was fortunate that I was still allowing her to enter my space. As she entered, she seemed to be taking in the space. She seemed to be trying to strike up a conversation when she said, "Nice apartment." I didn't answer. I wasn't here to make friends. "All right, Claire," I responded, cutting right to the chase. "What are you looking for?" She let out a loud sigh, as if she was already worn out from the game she was playing. She folded her arms and replied, "Mom told me about your conversation. You know. Look, I'm not here to go over anything again. Both of us are aware that you have always been challenging." The casualness with which she said that nearly made me chuckle. "Hardly," I said again. "Are you for real? You got me expelled from the residence. You made up emails. Is that challenging?" She dismissively waved her hand. "That's from long ago. I came here in order to put things right," she answered. "I think it's time to move past the family issues. Even though I realize they got complicated, and I may have overreacted at the time. What I was hearing was unbelievable." "Do you believe that you overreacted?" I spoke, straining to maintain a steady tone. "You ruined my relationship with our parents. You misled them and said lies about me. It has been somewhat difficult. We were severely affected by the pandemic, and even though I'm doing everything I can, it's not enough. We are in danger of losing everything. Even though Mom and Dad don't want to acknowledge it. With no pity in my heart, I crossed my arms. I'm going to assume that you want me to help you out." Claire made an uncomfortable move with defensiveness. She stated, "I'm not asking for a handout. I simply believe that we might be able to work something out together. I take it you're doing well for yourself. I assumed you would like to assist the family." She was unbelievable to me. She was attempting to use remorse to persuade me to save the family business, which she had destroyed. "You figured incorrectly," I replied bluntly. Claire blinked, obviously unprepared for that reaction. "What do you mean?" "Wait," I said firmly. "I mean I'm not helping you. Not after all of what you have done. Claire, you destroyed my life. Now that you're in difficulty, you expect me to forget that? You turned my own parents against me and came to your aid?" She looked at me in disbelief. Claire was at a loss for words for the first time in her life. "But we're family," she murmured haltingly, her confidence fading a bit. I gave a headshake. "We stopped being family the day you made it your mission to destroy me." Claire's expression turned pale. I could tell she was having trouble processing the fact that she wasn't used to hearing no. "Now you have to deal with the consequences." She slammed the door behind her and ran out of the apartment without saying another word. I let the strain out of me for a minute as I stood there. I felt guilty, as if I had been too severe. However, that remorse quickly vanished as I realized everything she had done to me. I felt like I was in charge of my life for the first time in years. Claire's shadow no longer surrounded me. I wasn't the scapegoat, or the second-best option. At last, I was free of it all. Second update: after Claire stormed out of my apartment, I assumed that everything would die down and that she would finally realize that I was done with her and the whole family drama. Naturally, though, I didn't realize how obstinate she might be. The knock was one of those loud, persistent ones that indicates the person on the other end isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I stood up immediately, suspecting who it might be. My mother and father were standing together like a united front when I opened the door. My dad appeared uneasy, as if he didn't want to be there. However, my mother, she was determined. I suppose my mother was trying to maintain a nice demeanor when she smiled at me. "Can we come in and talk? We need to sort some things out." I wanted to slam the door in their faces, but I reasoned that they would simply keep coming if I didn't let them in immediately. So, I sighed loudly and moved aside to let them in. As they entered, they looked about as if they were expecting something more than a simple apartment. My mom immediately headed for the couch, sitting down and stroking the seat next to her as if I were a small child she was attempting to comfort, while my dad remained silent. I crossed my arms and replied bluntly, "I'll stand." "All right," she responded, her smile taut. "Look, we know things have been difficult between us," I said again, raising an eyebrow. "Difficult? That's what you're calling it." When my dad did speak. "Apologize for what exactly? Kicking me out? Believing Claire's lies? Or was it that you didn't even bother checking in on me for 2 years?" My dad shifted uneasily. "We know we made mistakes," in a softer tone. "But we're family, and family has to stick together." I could sense that I was getting impatient. It was just the same thing again. They would whip out the family card as if it were meant to wipe out all the bad things that had transpired. This time, though, I wasn't going to fall for it. I stated rather plainly. There was silence for a while. When my dad did finally speak, it was in a rougher but more honest voice than I had heard him in years. "You're right." I was surprised by that. I stared at him and blinked. "What?" "You're right," he said again, letting out a deep sigh. "We screwed up. We believed Claire, we pushed you out, and we didn't even think twice about it. And now? Well, now things are falling apart, and we're desperate." I was at a loss for words. I didn't think he would be clean about it. In contrast, my mother appeared to be attempting to maintain her composure. She obviously hadn't anticipated that he would simply put everything out that way. I added, "I appreciate the honesty." Following a lengthy silence. "But that doesn't change anything." Then, with a sharper voice, my mother interrupted. "It doesn't change the fact that we need you. And you owe us after everything we've done for you." Once more, that feeling of entitlement was present. They genuinely thought that, simply because they were my parents, I owed them something. As if the years of disregard and partiality had no bearing, and that I should help them out now that they were having problems. "I don't owe you anything," I stated. "Not after the way you treated me. You made your choice when you believed Claire over me. When you threw me out and didn't even check if I was okay. Now you want me to save you? That's not how this works." My father remained silent. He just sat there, looking shamefully at the floor. However, my mother, she had not finished yet. She raised her voice and shouted, "We're your parents! We raised you! We took care of you! And now you're just going to abandon us?" I nearly felt terrible for her now, so I shook my head. "You didn't take care of me. Aunt Denise did. You chose Claire, and now you're stuck with her. That's on you." My mom looked like she was going to blow up, but my dad stopped her before she could say anything by placing a hand on her arm. For the first time since they entered, he looked me in the eye. As he got to his feet, he answered, "We understand," in a steady but dejected tone. "We're not going to push you anymore. We just needed to try." I nearly felt sorry for him for a moment. That sympathy vanished, though, when I realized all they had done to me. I said, "I hope you figure it out. and moved to open the door for them. But I'm not going to be part of it. My father gave a nod, as if he had anticipated it. But my mother gave me one final glance, part indignant, half begging. However, she got up and followed him out. Please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.